This is Hidden, a podcast about things unknown and people we are celebrating.
When I started a practice, I named it Veritas Counseling because Veritas means truth. And, being a counselor, you see the effects of people not living their truths, how that affects the body, how it affects the soul, the mind, everything.
What you are hearing is a discussion regarding a counseling business.
And so truth is such a central component to my life and my practice. I felt like it needed to be in the forefront. It needed to be center stage because of the importance of living your truth.
The person discussing it is a therapist.
My name is Christy Tischer. I am a mental health counselor and owner of Veritas Counseling in Wildwood, Missouri.
In this episode, we hear from Dr. Christina Tischer and what drew her into therapy.
Went to a small high school, graduated with 8 in my graduating class, and this small high school did not really prepare me for what I actually wanted to begin with at the beginning, which was to be a doctor. I didn't have a lot of science classes, math classes. I had enough to graduate and to get into college, but not enough to have the background really necessary. So I thought, okay, well, maybe I'll be a physical therapist in college, and same situation. There was kind of a science issue there. So then I was looking at being a psychologist, which I was very excited about. Well, you needed to pass a foreign language, and I could not pass French for the life of me. After that, I was looking at a Bachelor of Education Studies in Educational and Counseling Psychology. And that did not require a foreign language. And I was actually very excited about that because I come from a family of teachers and dentists and ping pong players. But teachers is kind of where it's applicable right here. So I'm very excited about that. Got my bachelor's degree, went on to get my master's in counseling. And I started working as a counselor in the late 90s, licensed in 2000. In the late 90s, side note, but it's pertinent for later on. Cognitive behavioral therapy was a big deal in the 90s. It was kind of the thing. And so I was raised in cognitive behavioral therapy. But I noticed, even back then, that didn't work for everybody. And so, but I didn't know what to do about that. I didn't know why, and I didn't know what to do. And so I just kind of stayed in that cognitive behavioral therapy vein. Well, I ended up transferring to Chicago and went in a different field for just a little while and into international adoption. And that was really enlightening and a good experience in Chicago. Moved back to St. Louis. And my brother and sister, who are 17 and 20 years younger than me, they were learning American Sign Language for class credit. They were, at least one of them, I believe, was in high school at the time, and so they were getting credit for ASL. And so my mom knew that I always wanted to join, or I always wanted to learn sign language, and so she paid for me to get the lessons along with my siblings. And I fell in love with both the language and later the people, the deaf and hard of hearing folks that use American Sign Language. And so that was a major turning point for me. I ended up quitting my job as a counselor at the time and going to school full time to learn the language and to actually learn interpreting, though I never went down the interpreting path strongly. I got a degree in it, but I went back to counseling. So at St. Louis Community College, that's where they were offering the degree that I went for. And I started working at St. Louis Community College in the counseling department. Eventually, I went to the Wildwood campus and built counseling services there. And from there, went to St. Charles Community College and built counseling services for that campus. And from there, went to St. Louis University and worked at St. Louis University as a counselor, a staff counselor for students. And St. Louis University has this amazing program that allows employees to earn degrees for very, very, very reduced fees. And so I thought, what if I got my PhD in higher education administration? And so I applied and started chipping away at my PhD while working. And it was a great experience. That's just a side note. Wonderful program and wonderful experience. During this time, while I was working on my PhD, I was, working with students, and the concept of anxiety came up often. Almost hourly. And students were defining anxiety. They were using anxiety, the word, in very different ways. For example, one person would say, my friends didn't invite me to dinner, and I have anxiety about that. And another person would say, I had a panic attack, but they called it anxiety. And so the term anxiety was used in very different ways, which was intriguing to me because I'm a fan of understanding how language is used. So this, I just kind of was thinking about that, and I thought, I wonder is there anything I can do about that? Still, meanwhile, cognitive behavioral therapy is what I knew and did often with students, but again, it was limited in its success with students, just as it was with all the other populations I had worked with before. So, side note, PhDs, when you do a PhD, there are two basic stages. One is the classes stage, so you take classes. Once you complete that, you start working on your dissertation. So I was, taking classes, and then started gathering research for my dissertation, gathering other people's research for my dissertation. And I was kind of headed in this direction of sensory, being sensory sensitive and sensory avoidant, and some things about the senses, and it kind of goes into the vein of being on the spectrum, things like that. And I came across the polyvagal theory in one of my continuing ed classes. And that exposure completely changed, it changed my life, but it changed the direction of my dissertation because it was so impactful.
Dr. Tischer goes into more detail pertaining to the body and mind, summarizing from her research goals with her dissertation.
The polyvagal theory is an understanding of the autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system is another way of saying the automatic nervous system. It's the more formal way, of course, but it's the things you don't think about. Heart rate, breathing. You don't have to tell your heart to beat. You don't have to tell your lungs to breathe. They just do it. And previously, before 1995, the understanding was that there were two components to the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. The sympathetic is like your fight or flight response, and then parasympathetic is what they call rest and digest. And so this system, pre-1995, was looked at as antagonistic. If you're not in one, you're in the other, that kind of thing. And then Stephen Porges came along and did research on the vagus nerve, and that really revolutionized our understanding of the autonomic nervous system.
Taken from the Polyvagal Institute online source, Dr. Stephen W. Porges is Distinguished University Scientist at Indiana University, the founding director of the Traumatic Stress Research Consortium, and Professor of Psychiatry at the University of North Carolina, and Professor Emeritus at both the University of Illinois at Chicago and the University of Maryland. The polyvagal theory proposed by Dr. Porges ties the evolution of the mammalian autonomic nervous system to social behavior, with emphasis on the importance of a physiological state in expression of behavioral problems and psychiatric disorders. This mammalian autonomic nervous system, the vagus nerve, is the longest cranial nerve in the body. It connects the brain to many organs, to name a few, the heart and digestive system, and partakes in involuntary functions like heart rate, mood, and most importantly, helps the body relax and aids in recovery from stress.
With this understanding, we now know that there are not two components to the autonomic nervous system, there are three. And they're not antagonistic, but they are hierarchical.
The polyvagal theory references three principal states that occur beneath our conscious awareness. Regarding the three principal states, as Dr. Tischer suggests, think of a traffic light. But before we talk more about polyvagal theory, there are three important concepts to know.
The first is the concept of neuroception. And neuroception is that we are always scanning our environment for cues of safety and cues of danger. And this is happening below our awareness, below our level of consciousness, but it is always happening. And so when your body scans and picks up cues of danger, it will shift your autonomic nervous system on its own. This is not a cognitive, meaning conscious process. This happens, your body decides. It will shift into the appropriate physiological state to meet the demand of the moment. And if there are cues of safety, then great, it'll shift into green. So that's interesting. Neuroception is a very impactful concept. And it's funny because when I worked at St. Louis University, we had this really long hallway, and there was a wooden floor. And when I would go get my clients, I would often wear heels, and so it sounded like a rhinoceros coming down the hall. Bum, bum, bum. Well, that is actually a cue of danger. Like that low-level sound is a cue of danger. And so, not knowing it at the time until I learned this, my footsteps were likely putting students into a bit of yellow, into a bit of fight or flight before I got them for a session. So, learned my lesson on that one. The next concept is the vagal brake, and this is a concept that I use often with my clients now. It's extremely helpful. So the vagus nerve, that ventral vagus nerve that's associated with social engagement, that is also connected to the heart, and every time you exhale, the vagus nerve is acting like a brake on your heart rate. And so how this translates into, what do you do with that knowledge? I have clients inhale normally and exhale for as long as they can, inhale normally, exhale as long as they can, and it is slowing down their heart rate. And so when that happens, your body is using its own language to speak to itself, saying, I don't need to be in yellow or red. I can be in green. I am not in danger, like that kind of thing. So, a very useful concept, the vagal brake. Another concept that's useful is co-regulation. And so we are wired to co-regulate with each other. And so if somebody walks up to me with a smile, my nervous system is going to likely, if all the cues are congruent, receive that as a cue of safety, and it will help shift me into green if I'm not necessarily in green. That's just an example, but what you do, what you bring to the energy, the body language, the facial expression you bring to the party, it affects other people and they affect you. And so this is also a useful tool in engaging with other people. Cues of safety is the final, and I've spoken about this just a little bit already, but that's the final concept that is connected to the polyvagal theory that I'm going to mention today. But cues of safety include voice prosody, so how melodic is your voice, or are you monotone like this? It's eye gaze. Are you looking at the person that you're talking to, for example? Are you staring at the person you're talking to? Eye gaze matters. Facial expression, that all matters, especially eyebrows. That is eyebrows indicate cues of safety or cues of danger. So pretty interesting. Also interesting is the middle ear muscles shift. When there are cues of safety, we hear voice more clearly. We hear voice. When there are cues of danger present, we hear voice less, and we're listening more for sounds of predators. So very high-pitched or very low-pitched sounds. So we don't hear voices clearly. So folks with anxiety may struggle to hear well on the phone because you don't have the face talking to you, you just have a voice, and that can be tough. So if you think of a traffic light, the green is that social engagement system. It's also called rest and digest. The yellow is the mobilization system, traditionally called fight or flight. And then the red represents the immobilization system, which is a form of shutting down.
Each color from the traffic light concept, green, yellow, and red, has its own cost and benefits.
If you can think of a traffic light, green would be that social engagement system, that ventral vagal system that's myelinated and above the diaphragm. That is like the green light in our traffic light. And its features include your blood pressure and your pulse are lower than in the other two states. There's reciprocal eye contact with others, and your middle ear muscles are listening for the human voice. There's spontaneous engagement between people. And your bodily processes of digestion are supported. So you're just digesting normally. The social engagement system inhibits states of defense, meaning yellow or red, which is an interesting thing to think about. There are costs and benefits with each of these systems, but actually the only cost for the social engagement system is crow's feet, that one that I've seen, because you're smiling, and you smile enough, you get crow's feet. So I think that's a pretty decent cost for being in green as often as possible. Of course, the benefits, the resources in your body are used for restoration, health and growth, that kind of thing. We're also more able, in green, we're more able to read accurately the intent of others, which is pretty interesting. This is where we do our best cognitive functioning, our best learning, innovation. It all occurs in this physiological state. That's the social engagement system. In the mobilization system, traditionally called fight or flight, its features include your heart rate and your blood pressure increase. You're getting ready to, fight or flee. You sweat more, your digestion slows down. There's a hypervigilance. It's like your senses are all turned on all at the same time. That's basically what hypervigilance means. Interestingly, your blood clotting abilities become maximized. And we go into mobilization when we neurocept danger and a degree of agency in that danger. That means you neurocept danger and you can do something about it. which is a very important concept then when we look at RED, when we look at immobilization. So the benefits and the costs. The benefits of mobilization: speed, and you outrun a tiger, you outrun a threat, or you fight it. So preservation of life is really what we're looking at here as a benefit. The costs of this system of being in yellow are accuracy, conscious and unconscious processing, which is like a higher order thinking, and you're not as able as in green to accurately perceive other people's intent or subsequent threat. You're off. You probably are perceiving additional danger where there may or may not be additional danger if you're in yellow. Again, very interesting. It messes with your accuracy. So the features of the immobilization system, that red of our traffic light, include flat facial affect. That means kind of a blank face. Paralysis of thought and action. You're kind of paralyzed. You maybe feel stuck. Emotional numbing, dissociation. Your voice prosody goes. You lack expression in your voice. There's a drop in blood pressure. Sometimes people poop in those moments, fainting, and reduced oxygen to the brain. Now, the immobilization system occurs when we neurocept life threat and our options for escaping or fighting are not there. We do not neurocept options. So it's this, the body keeps, there is wisdom in the body. And the goal is for you to survive. And so the body will decide what it needs to do in order for you to survive. And this is a concept that I talk about with people who have been raped and maybe blame themselves. Well, the body does what it needs to do to survive. And so there's sometimes a shift of perspective, and they're able to blame themselves less or not at all. They get it, that the body decided. Why didn't I fight back? The body decided this is what I needed to do in order to survive. The benefits and cost of immobilization. Benefits, we've got increased pain threshold. We can withstand greater pain. And again, the idea, preservation of life. The costs, when you're in red, you're basically immune to social interaction. There is not real social interaction in red. You are shut down. And then it's harder to get out of immobilization, out of red, than it is yellow. And so we want to not be in red as often as possible. We want to be in green as often as possible. And in any given day, it's very normal to go yellow to green. Maybe you stick your toe in red, but you're back in yellow, green. But if you live life in red, it is more difficult. It's possible. Safety is the way out, but it is difficult to get out of red if you're in that space for long. Ideas for how to activate this social engagement system. Here are some ideas. We talked about the extended exhale that slows down your heart rate. It tells your body you don't need to be in fight or flight. That is a way to activate that social engagement system. Face-to-face social interactions with people you trust also activates that system. Music, actually wind instruments specifically, and singing. Wind instruments and singing, because you're controlling your breath and have extended exhales. Those are ways through. Also humming too, actually. Humming will also activate that social engagement system. So this understanding of the polyvagal theory just shifted my desire for my dissertation. I was like, I want to use this because it permeates every area of life. So instead of working on sensory research, I went with understanding anxiety, and specifically college students' perceptions of their anxiety. So I constructed it with the help of advisors and very wise people. I constructed this study to interview college students at St. Louis University and ask them about their anxiety experiences. But before I asked them about anxiety experiences, I asked a couple other things. One was, how do they define anxiety? And there was actually quite a spectrum of words used to define anxiety. And then I asked them about their non-anxiety experiences in college. What was it like to basically be in green? I wanted to understand what their green, their social engagement system, what was that like? And so they did that. And I used the polyvagal theory as a framework. And so when I asked them about anxiety, I would say, just describe it. What did you feel physiologically, like fast heart rate, sweating, like that kind of thing? What did you feel psychologically, thoughts and feelings? And what did you do? And what was the intensity of those things? What was the intensity of your heart rate, going up, that kind of thing. So from their responses, what was sifted is that there were three basic anxiety groups that emerged. And I call them anxiety 1, anxiety 2, anxiety 3. So anxiety 1, their stressors to the things that created anxiety were they had a very definite beginning and end, like a test, or in my dissertation I call it an academic evaluation, but like something very specific. And the duration of their anxiety lasted from minutes to hours. And then they did something about it, and then the anxiety went away. Anxiety 2, this was more of a gripping anxiety, and the stressors included the perception of physical threat, like physical safety, a threat to physical safety, and academic evaluation, like a test. And that duration was also minutes to hours. But the intensity was extremely high, and it was in mobilization and so yellow and red. And I didn't mention this, but in anxiety 1, it was just yellow. It was just mobilization. So we moved from anxiety 1 only being in yellow to anxiety 2, yellow and red, and it's extremely intense. Here's where we see our panic attacks, these folks. So I think every one of them mentioned eventually going to counseling. So initially they didn't do anything about the anxiety, but eventually they went to counseling. So that was kind of interesting too. Then anxiety 3, the stressors were relationships, academic evaluation, and perception of threat to physical safety. So kind of similar to some of the others. But in anxiety 3, this was a very chronic anxiety. It was not gripping. It didn't have like a panic attack. With panic attacks, there's always a beginning and an end. This lasted minutes, hours, days, months, and on. And it was often associated with negative self-talk, perception of other people's evaluation. It was chronic anxiety. And what was interesting about anxiety 3 also was that when I went back through the data and I was analyzing the data, anxiety 3 was not actually describing anxiety as it has been defined academically, but it was actually describing shame, which Brene Brown has written quite a bit about. So interesting about anxiety 3. So that was the conclusion of my dissertation, and it's a book, but no one has ever read the book because dissertations I've not even made it all the way through my own dissertation. They're dry and boring, but some interesting concepts to come from that. The polyvagal theory, beyond the dissertation, it still permeates, how I see almost everything. I'm aware of neuroception. I know when I go get a new client, they're probably a little in yellow because it's intimidating to see a new therapist. And so I'm very mindful of cues of safety, cues of danger, reciprocity, co-regulation, that kind of thing. So it's this concept, this understanding of the autonomic nervous system is very transformative. So I love what I do, and I love the clients that I work with, and this is great. I love this field. It's fabulous. I have no regrets. I love it. And in the future, I would like to expand horizons a bit, particularly in the areas of research. I'd like to continue to do some research, but also I'm going to start a podcast, so look for that in spring of 2025. It will be called Therapist Underground, and it will be about therapy-related topics. And most of the time, likely, I will be speaking with a colleague of mine, and it'll be a conversation between therapists about therapy. And that's exciting. If you want to know more, my website is veritascounselingstl.com, and my email is veritascounselingllc@outlook.com. If you're interested in becoming a therapist, there are a few different ways that you could do that. You can probably get a bachelor's degree in almost anything. The important component is your master's degree. And so getting a master's in counseling or social work or something in that related type of field would work. You take a test. You have, I think it's 2,000 or 3,000 hours to work. It takes a couple of years. But then you get licensed and you can go from there. If you want to know more about the polyvagal theory, I would encourage you to look at the work of Stephen Porges, Porges. 1995 was his groundbreaking study. But also his son Seth Porges, has a great YouTube video about the polyvagal theory. It's about 25 minutes long or so, and he uses visual aids, which is helpful. So I would encourage you to look at that video. If you want to know more, look at Stephen Porges' work. His work is extensive in this area. 1995 was just the first little baby step, and it has just exploded. So there's research into how this is connected to autism, the role that yoga can play with polyvagal theory, borderline personality disorder, how does that relate to the polyvagal theory? There are multiple avenues to investigate here if that's something of interest to you.
I would like to thank Dr. Christina Tischer for her interview. This is Hidden is brought to you by Southside 2-Bit Studios.